The ice-cold water of the North Atlantic felt like 1,000 knives cutting into Friedrich Weber's skin. He gasped for air as another wave crashed over his head. Around him, the last pieces of his U-boat disappeared beneath the black surface. U-534 was gone. 23 months of hunting Allied convoys had ended in less than 5 minutes. "Commander, over here." Klaus Bauer's voice cut through the sound of wind and waves. Weber swam toward his executive officer, his muscles already going numb from the December cold. He could see 6 other heads bobbing in the water. 7 men. Only 7 survived from a crew of 48. Young Otto Schneider was crying. Not from fear, but from the cold. The 19-year-old radio operator had been on his first patrol. Now he would never make it home to Hamburg. None of them would, Weber thought. They would freeze to death in less than 10 minutes. But then came the sound of engines. An American destroyer cut through the water toward them. Its gray hull towered above the waves like a moving fortress. Weber had expected this. What he had not expected was what came next. The Americans threw ropes and life preservers into the water. Sailors shouted at them in broken German to grab on. Strong hands pulled Weber from the ocean. Someone wrapped a thick blanket around his shoulders. Another sailor pushed a cup of hot coffee into his shaking hands. Weber looked up at the young American sailor who had saved him. The boy could not have been older than 20. He smiled and said something in English that Weber did not understand. But the tone was clear. It was not hatred. It was not even triumph. It was almost friendly. "They're taking us to their carrier," Bauer said in German, his teeth chattering. "I heard the radio call." "Carrier?" Weber looked confused. American carriers operated in the Pacific against the Japanese. What was one doing in the Atlantic? The destroyer's engines rumbled as it changed course. Weber stood on the deck, still wrapped in his blanket, watching the horizon. The American sailors gave them more coffee and some kind of sweetbread. One sailor even offered Otto a cigarette and lit it for him with a smile. This was wrong, Weber thought. These men should hate us. We have been sinking their ships for 4 years. But they treat us like survivors, not enemies. Then he saw IT first. Weber thought it was an island. The gray shape on the horizon was too large to be a ship. But as the destroyer moved closer, the impossible became real. It was a ship, the biggest ship Weber had ever seen in his life. The aircraft carrier rose from the ocean like a steel mountain. Its flat deck stretched longer than 3 football fields. The island's superstructure stood 7 stories tall. Even from 2 kilometers away, Weber could see dozens of aircraft parked on the deck like toys. "Mein Gott," Bauer whispered beside him. "It's bigger than the Tirpitz." Otto just stared with his mouth open. The young sailor had never seen anything bigger than their U-boat that Weber's mind was racing. He had read intelligence reports about American carriers. The reports said they were around 270 meters long and carried about 80 aircraft. But reading numbers on paper and seeing this monster in person were 2 completely different things. The name on the hull read USS Essex. The destroyer pulled alongside the carrier. Weber looked up at the flight deck. American sailors moved around the aircraft with casual efficiency. Some were laughing. Others were smoking cigarettes and talking. One sailor sat on the wing of a fighter plane, reading a magazine. On a warship, in the middle of the Atlantic. In the middle of a war. This disturbed Weber more than the guns, more than the size, more than everything else. These Americans were not tense. They were not afraid. They acted like they were working at a factory, not fighting a war. The German prisoners climbed a rope ladder up the side of the carrier. Weber's frozen fingers could barely grip the ropes, but American sailors at the top helped pull them aboard. They landed on a small platform, and for the first time, Weber stood on an American aircraft carrier. The noise hit him first. Engines roared. Metal clanged against metal. Men shouted in English. The smell of aviation fuel and hot oil filled the air. Everything vibrated with power and energy that a young American officer approached them. He wore a clean uniform and had the relaxed confidence of someone who had never known defeat. "Welcome aboard the Essex, gentlemen," the officer said in perfect German. "I am Lieutenant Commander James Harrison. You are now prisoners of war of the United States Navy. You will be treated fairly and according to international law. Do any of you need medical attention?" Weber shook his head. His men were cold and shocked, but alive. Good, Harrison continued. We will take you below deck for processing. You will receive dry clothes, hot food, and a place to sleep. The war is over for you now. You are safe. Safe. The words sounded strange. Weber had not felt safe in 4 years. As Harrison led them toward a door in the carrier's superstructure, Weber looked back at the flight deck one more time. A fighter plane taxied past, its engine thundering. The pilot, barely visible in the cockpit, gave them a casual wave. Weber felt something cold settle in his stomach. It was not the freezing water anymore. It was realization. These Americans with their massive ships and casual confidence, with their hot coffee and friendly smiles, with their aircraft carriers that looked like floating cities, they were going to win this war. There was nothing Germany could do to stop them. The door closed behind them with a heavy metallic sound. Weber blinked as his eyes adjusted to the electric lights. He had expected a dark, cramped prison hold like the ones on German ships. What he saw instead made no sense at all. The corridor stretched ahead like a city street. Pipes and cables ran along the ceiling in organized rows. The floor was painted gray and marked with colored lines and arrows. Signs in English pointed in different directions. Everything was clean. Everything was organized. Everything was massive. This way, gentlemen, Harrison said, leading them forward. 2 armed Marines followed behind, but they did not point their rifles. They just walked relaxed and alert. Weber tried to count his steps as they walked. After 50 steps, the corridor was still going. After 100 steps, they passed their first intersection. Other corridors branched off to the left and right. This was not a ship. This was a maze made of steel. They passed a room where men in blue coveralls worked on what looked like a large lathe. Metal shavings curled away from spinning steel. The smell of cutting oil drifted into the corridor. Machine shop, Harrison explained without being asked. We can manufacture most replacement parts ourselves. No need to return to port for small repairs. Bauer stared at the equipment. You have a machine shop on a warship? Harrison smiled. We have 3 machine shops, actually. 1 for each major department. They walked further. The next room had ovens. Large ovens. A man in a white apron was pulling out fresh loaves of bread. The smell made Otto's stomach growl loudly. They had eaten nothing but cold canned fish on the U-boat for the last 3 weeks. Bakery number 2, Harrison said. We bake fresh bread every day. This carrier has a crew of over 2,600 men. They need to eat. How much food do you carry? Weber asked, his commander's mind automatically calculating logistics. Enough for 90 days of continuous operations without resupply, Harrison replied. We have our own butcher shop, our own ice cream factory, our own everything. Ice cream factory. Weber was sure he had misheard. His English was not perfect, but Bauer's eyes went wide. So maybe the translation was correct. They turned another corner. A group of young sailors stood in line outside a small room. Music drifted out. American jazz music. One sailor was laughing at something his friend had said. Barber shop, Harrison pointed, and the soda fountain is just next to it. The men can get a haircut and a milkshake on their break. Otto could not help himself. You have milkshakes? On a warship? Harrison laughed. Of course. Morale is important. A sailor who feels comfortable works better. The Navy learned this years ago. Weber felt his understanding of naval warfare crumbling. On German submarines, men shared bunks and ate terrible food and never saw daylight for months. They did this because it was war. War meant sacrifice. War meant suffering. But these Americans, they brought their entire civilization with them to war. They descended a metal stairway. The sounds changed. Now, Weber heard the roar of engines and the bang of hammers. They emerged onto what Harrison called the hangar deck. Weber stopped walking. He could not help it. The hangar deck was a cathedral made of metal. The ceiling stood at least 6 meters high. The space stretched away in both directions, longer than a city block. And everywhere, there were aircraft fighters. Diva bombes, torpedo bombes, scout planes. They sat in neat rows, their wings folded up to save space. Mechanics crawled over them like ants. Some were replacing engines. Others were loading ammunition. One team was painting a fresh kill mark on a fighter's nose. Bauer was counting under his breath in German. 15, 20, 25, 30. Mein Gott, there must be 40 aircraft just on this deck. 58, actually, Harrison corrected in German, and 30 more on the flight deck above us. We can carry 90 aircraft when fully loaded. 90 aircraft. Weber tried to remember the last Luftwaffe base he had visited in France. It had maybe 30 planes on a good day, spread across acres of land. This one ship carried 3 times that number. All ready to launch at a moment's notice, a young pilot walked past, wearing a brown leather jacket. He was eating an apple and reading a letter. He looked about 20 years old, maybe younger. He did not even glance at the German prisoners. Another pilot was sitting on a workbench, polishing his sunglasses and chatting with a mechanic. Your pilots seem very relaxed, Weber said carefully. Harrison nodded. They are well-trained and well-rested. We rotate squadrons regularly. No one flies exhausted. Safety and effectiveness go together. In the Luftwaffe, pilots flew until they were dead or wounded. There was no rotation. There was no rest. There were just missions, one after another, until luck ran out. They walked to the far end of the hangar deck. Harrison opened another door. This will be your quarters until we can transfer you to a proper POW facility. The room was small but clean. It had been a storage space, but someone had set up 8 cots with blankets. A single light bulb hung from the ceiling. There was a bucket of fresh water and a stack of towels. Next to the door sat a box of clean dungarees, the blue work uniforms the American sailors wore. Change into dry clothes, Harrison said. Food will arrive in 30 minutes. Hot soup and bread. After you eat, you can rest. The bathroom, is 20 meters down the corridor on the left. Thank you, Weber said quietly. Harrison paused at the door. You fought well, Commander. Your war is over now. That is something to be grateful for. After he left, the 7 Germans stood in silence for a long moment. Finally, Otto spoke. We never had a chance, did we? Weber looked at his young radio operator. The boy deserved the truth. No, Weber said. We never did. Weber had not slept well. The room was comfortable, warmer than his quarters on the U-boat had ever been. But his mind would not rest. He kept thinking about the machine shops, the bakeries, the aircraft. So many aircraft. At T5 in the morning, the entire ship came alive. The metal walls vibrated. Footsteps thundered in the corridors above their heads. Engines roared to life somewhere in the distance. The whole carrier seemed to wake up at once, like a giant steel animal stretching after sleep. What is happening? Otto asked, sitting up on his cot. Before anyone could answer, the door opened. A young Marine guard stood there with a different expression than yesterday. Yesterday, he had been friendly. Today, he was all business. On your feet, he said in English, making gestures with his hands so they would understand. Morning flight, operations. You want to see? Cool, The Germans looked at each other. Was this a trick? But the Marine just waited patiently. So they followed him. He led them down a short corridor to a small room Weber had not noticed before. It had a single window, thick glass that looked out onto the hangar deck. But the hangar deck was different now. Half the aircraft were gone. The elevator platforms, massive pieces of the deck itself, were moving. They lift the aircraft to the flight deck, Bauer whispered. Hydraulic elevators. Brilliant engineering. The Marine pointed up and made a gesture like a plane taking off. Then he pointed to a narrow metal ladder. They climbed. The ladder was steep and went straight up through the ship's superstructure. Weber's legs burned by the time they reached the top. The Marine opened a hatch, and suddenly they were outside in the cold morning air. But they were not on the flight deck. They were inside the island, the ship's tall command tower, in a small observation room. The window here gave him a perfect view of the entire flight deck, and what Weber saw took his breath away. The deck was controlled chaos. 30 aircraft sat ready, their engines already warming up. Pilots climbed into cockpits. Deck crews in different colored shirts ran between the planes. Yellow shirts directed traffic. Blue shirts chained and unchained aircraft. Red shirts handled bombs and ammunition. Green shirts managed the catapults. That IT was like watching a dance where everyone knew their exact steps. No one bumped into anyone else. No one seemed confused. Every man had a job, and every man did it perfectly. How did they not kill each other? Otto asked. One mistake with those propellers, but there were no mistakes that the yellow shirt handler stood in front of a fighter. He made hand signals, clear and precise. The pilot responded, revving the engine. The handler made another signal, and the fighter moved forward exactly 10 feet, then stopped. Another signal, another perfect movement. Meanwhile, a red shirt crew was loading a bomb under a dive bomber's wing. They worked fast, but carefully, checking every connection twice. A green shirt tested the catapult mechanism, a massive steam-powered device that would throw the aircraft into the air fast enough to fly. The deck officer stood on a small platform, watching everything. He held colored flags and used them to communicate with the handlers. No radios needed, just flags and hand signals and perfect understanding. Weber checked his watch. 5 minutes past 5 in the morning. The first fighter moved into position on the catapult. The pilot saluted. The deck officer dropped his flag. Steam exploded. The fighter shot forward and disappeared off the end of the deck. 3 seconds later, it was climbing into the gray dawn sky. 20 seconds later, the second fighter launched. 20 seconds after that, the third. The rhythm never stopped. Fighter, dive bomber, torpedo bomber, fighter, fighter, dive bomber. Each launch was identical. Each was perfect. The catapult crew worked like a machine, resetting their equipment in seconds. Bauer was timing them with his watch. 18 to 22 seconds between launches. Consistent. Efficient. They can launch everything in less than 15 minutes. Weber did the math in his head. 90 aircraft. 15 minutes. Any target within 300 kilometers could be hit by a massive strike force before they even knew the carrier was there. He remembered the Bismarck, Germany's greatest battleship, pride of the fleet. In May 1941, British carrier aircraft had crippled its rudder with a single torpedo. The mighty Bismarck could only sail in circles until the British fleet caught up and sank it. One carrier had killed a battleship, but the Bismarck had faced only one small British carrier with perhaps 20 aircraft. This American carrier had 90. And according to Lieutenant Commander Harrison, America had dozens of these carriers now. A young pilot caught Weber's attention. He looked barely old enough to shave. He climbed into his fighter's cockpit while eating something. An apple? No, a banana. The pilot finished the banana, threw the peel to a deck handler, checked his instruments, and gave a thumbs-up signal. 30 seconds later, that pilot was in the air, heading toward whatever target the Americans had chosen for today. Otto was watching the same pilot. He was eating breakfast, the young German said quietly. During combat operations, he was eating breakfast. That was exactly what disturbed Weber most. Not the technology, not the size, not even the perfect coordination. It was the attitude. These Americans treated war like a job. Wake up, eat breakfast, fly a combat mission, come back, eat lunch. Routine. Normal. No drama. The last aircraft launched at 5:27 a.m. 22 minutes from start to finish. 30 aircraft now flying in formation over the Atlantic. The deck crews immediately began preparing for the next launch. They moved aircraft from the hangar deck. They reloaded the catapults. They cleaned the deck. In 15 minutes, they would be ready to launch 30 more. The Marine Guard tapped Weber's shoulder and pointed to the ladder. Time to go back below. As Weber climbed down, he heard Otto ask Bauer a question in German. How many aircraft does the entire Luftwaffe have left? Bauer was silent for a moment. Then, maybe 2,000 fighters in all of Europe. And we lose 50 every day. Otto did the math. So, this ship alone carries almost 5% of what we have left. Yes, Bauer said. And Harrison said America has dozens of these carriers. Yes. They reached the bottom of the ladder and walked back to their room in silence. The war was over. They just had not told Germany yet. 3 days passed. The Germans stayed in their small room, eating regular meals and reading old American magazines the guards brought them. They could not understand most of the English words, but the pictures told stories of their own. Advertisements for cars, photos of factories, images of American cities with no bomb damage, no rubble, Just clean streets and tall buildings, and people smiling that on the fourth day, Lieutenant Commander Harrison returned. "Commander Weber," he said formally, "Rear Admiral Mitchell has requested to speak with you and your officers. Please come with me." Weber's stomach tightened. An admiral wanted to see them personally. This could mean interrogation, maybe torture. The Americans seemed civilized, but war made men do terrible things. They followed Harrison through new corridors, climbing higher into the island superstructure. Finally, they reached a door marked Flag Conference Room in English letters. Inside, the room was simple. A large table, comfortable chairs, maps on the walls. And sitting at the head of the table was a man in his 50s wearing an admiral's stars on his collar. Rear Admiral Robert Mitchell stood and offered his hand. Weber hesitated, then shook it. Enemy or not, military courtesy had its place. "Please sit," Mitchell said in surprisingly good German. "Coffee? Cigarettes?" He pushed a box of American cigarettes across the table and poured coffee from a steel pot. Real coffee, not the terrible substitute they had been drinking in Germany for 2 years. "I am not here to interrogate you," Mitchell began. "Your U-boat's codes were broken months ago. We knew where you were going before you did. We know your fuel capacity, your torpedo loadout, everything. You have no secrets to tell me." Weber felt his face flush. Broken codes? The Enigma machine was supposed to be unbreakable. Mitchell seemed to read his mind. The Enigma was excellent engineering, but you Germans made small mistakes. Used the same settings too often. Repeated patterns. Our mathematicians in England broke it in 1941. Every message you sent, we read. The words hit Weber like depth charges. Every message, every order, every patrol route. The Americans and British had been reading their mail for 3 years. "Then why?" Weber started, but Mitchell raised his hand. "Why do we not sink every U-boat immediately? Because that would tell you we broke your codes. Better to let some of you survive, let you think you were being clever, while we read everything and protected our most important convoys." Mitchell opened a folder and pulled out photographs. He slid them across the table. Weber picked up the first photo. It showed a massive shipyard. Dozens of ships in various stages of construction filled the frame. The ships were huge, identical, lined up like products in a factory. "Norfolk Naval Shipyard, Virginia," Mitchell explained. "We took this photo last month. 24 Essex-class carriers under construction. One launches every month. By the end of 1944, the U.S. Navy will have more carriers than the rest of the world combined." Bauer picked up another photo. This one showed rows and rows of aircraft. Hundreds of them, parked on an airfield so large it looked like a city. "Aircraft production facility in California," Mitchell continued. "We build 5,000 aircraft per month now. Fighters, bombers, scout planes. By 1945, we will build 8,000 per month." Otto stared at a photo of what looked like a parking lot full of tanks. "How many?" he asked in broken English. "In that photo, about 600 M4 Sherman tanks waiting for shipment to Europe. We produce 2,000 per month." Mitchell pulled out more photos. Factories, shipyards, training bases, mountains of supplies. He spread them across the table like playing cards. "I show you these," Mitchell said, "not to be cruel, but because you're officers. You understand strategy. You understand logistics. And you need to understand the truth." He leaned forward, his voice serious but not unkind. "Germany never had a chance to win this war. Your leaders knew these numbers before they invaded Poland. They knew America's industrial capacity. They knew what would happen when we joined the fight. They gambled that they could win before we fully mobilized. They lost that gamble." Weber felt something break inside him. All those men, all those U-boats, all those missions, for nothing. They had been fighting a war that was already lost. "How many carriers does Germany have?" Mitchell asked, though he obviously knew the answer. "We have one, the Graf Zeppelin. It is still not finished," Weber answered quietly. "And submarines? We had about 1,200 built during the entire war. We have maybe 400 left operational." Mitchell nodded. "We are building 200 submarines per month now, and they are better than yours. Faster, deeper diving, better sonar. In 6 months, we will have more submarines than Germany ever built." The admiral stood and walked to a map on the wall. It showed the Atlantic Ocean covered in red and blue symbols. Every blue marker is an Allied convoy that crossed safely in the last month. Every red X is a U-boat we sank. Your submarine war is over, Commander Weber. You just did not know it yet. Mitchell returned to his seat. He pulled out a pen and paper. I'm offering you a chance to write letters home. Through the Red Cross, they will reach your families. Let them know you are alive and safe. The letters will be censored, of course, but you can tell them you're being treated well. For the first time in the meeting, Mitchell's voice became gentle. Your war is over, gentlemen. You fought bravely for your country. No one can take that from you. But the war itself will end soon. Maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And then we all go home. I hope with less bloodshed than we have already seen. He stood, and the Germans stood with him. Your leaders knew these numbers, Mitchell repeated. They knew before they started. And they sent you anyway. That is something you should think about. The meeting was over. Harrison led them back to their room. That night, Weber sat on his cot and wrote a letter to his wife Maria in Bremen. He told her he was alive. He told her he was safe. He told her the war would be over soon. He did not tell her that they had never had a chance, that their sons had died for a cause that was lost from the beginning, that their leaders had known and sent them anyway. Some truths were too heavy to put in a letter. 2 weeks later, Harrison came to their room with news. You're being transferred today, he said. A transport ship will take you to a POW camp in Virginia. You will spend the rest of the war there, safe and away from combat. The 7 Germans gathered their few belongings. The Navy had given them each a small canvas bag with clean clothes, toiletries, and some books in German. Small kindnesses that made their captivity easier. Before you go, Harrison said, I am authorized to let you see the sun one more time. Fresh air. 15 minutes on deck. They climbed the now familiar ladders to the flight deck level. But this time, instead of the observation room, Harrison led them outside to the actual deck. The ocean stretched away in every direction under a clear blue sky. The morning sun felt warm on Weber's face. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. Salt air. He had not realized how much he missed it. Then Otto gasped, and Weber opened his eyes. His brain could not process what he was seeing. It was too much, too big, impossible. The Essex was not alone. Ships filled the ocean as far as Weber could see. In every direction, from horizon to horizon, there was nothing but gray steel floating on blue water. The Atlantic Ocean had disappeared under the American Navy. Weber started counting and gave up at 20. There were too many. Directly ahead, he saw 3 more Essex-class carriers. Behind them, 2 larger carriers that looked even more powerful. To the left, a line of battleships, their massive guns pointing at the sky. To the right, a swarm of destroyers and cruisers, moving in formation like schools of fish. This is Task Force 38, Harrison said quietly. Part of the Pacific Fleet. We are heading to join the war against Japan. How many ships? Bauer asked in a whisper. Harrison thought for a moment. In this immediate formation, probably 80 ships. But the entire fleet has more than 300 vessels. 300 ships. Weber tried to remember the entire German Navy at its peak. Maybe 40 major warships. And most of those were already sunk without a carrier to their left launched aircraft. Weber watched the tiny fighters climb into the sky. Behind it, another carrier launched more. And another. The sky began to fill with American planes, dozens of them, forming up into squadrons. Otto was crying. Not sobbing, just quiet tears running down his face. We told ourselves we were fighting for Germany, he said. We told ourselves we were brave. We told ourselves we could win. You were brave, Harrison said. Every man who goes to sea in war is brave. But bravery is not enough. A massive battleship passed close enough for Weber to read its name. USS New Jersey. The ship was enormous, bigger than any German battleship he had seen. Its guns could probably fire shells the size of cars. And it was just one of many. Bauer was doing calculations in his head, his technical mind unable to stop working even now. The steel in this fleet, he muttered. It must be millions of tons. Germany's entire steel production for a year could not build even 10% of what I see here. Weber watched a group of sailors on the Essex's deck playing some kind of game with a ball. Nearby, others sat on the deck eating sandwiches. One sailor was writing a letter. Another was reading a comic book. They looked like factory workers on lunch break, not men heading to war. This was America's secret, Weber suddenly understood. Not the ships, not the aircraft, not even the industrial capacity. It was the attitude. These men knew they could not lose. They knew their country had so much power, so many resources, so many ships and planes and tanks that victory was just a matter of time. They were not desperate warriors fighting for survival. They were workers doing a job, confident they had all the tools they needed. Germany had been desperate from the start, fighting with not enough fuel, not enough ammunition, not enough everything. Their U-boats went to sea knowing they had maybe a 50-50 chance of coming back. Their pilots flew until they died because there were no replacements. Every German soldier fought like it was their last battle because it usually was. But these Americans? They rotated crews. They provided rest. They served ice cream and showed movies and gave out comic books. They fought with the confidence of men who knew more ships were being built, more planes were being manufactured, more soldiers were training. If they lost this carrier, America would build 2 more to replace it. If they lost a squadron, 3 more would arrive next month. "It is time," Harrison said. "The transport is waiting." They climbed down to a lower deck where a small ship was tied alongside. The POW transport was not large, maybe a converted freighter, but it looked sturdy and well-maintained. Weber prepared aboard. He looked back at the Essex one final time. A new flight of fighters was launching for patrol. The carrier continued its operations without pause, without drama, just efficient routine. One carrier among dozens. One small piece of an unstoppable machine. "Commander Weber," Harrison said, offering his hand. "I hope you make it home safely after the war ends." Weber shook his hand. "Thank you for treating us with respect." "You were brave sailors who did your duty," Harrison replied. "The war was your leader's fault, not yours." Weber climbed down to the transport ship. His 6 men followed. As the ships separated and the transport's engines rumbled to life, Weber stood at the rail watching the fleet. The Essex grew smaller in the distance, but the fleet seemed to go on forever. Ships and more ships and more ships, stretching across the ocean like a steel blanket. Otto came and stood beside him. "Do you think Germany can still win?" the young sailor asked. Weber looked at his youngest crew member, the boy who had cried from cold in the Atlantic, the boy who had survived when so many had not, the boy who deserved truth, not propaganda. "No," Weber said. "We lost this war before it started. We just did not know it." The transport turned west toward America, toward their prison camp, toward the end of their war. Behind them, the American fleet continued east toward Europe, toward victory, toward history. Weber thought of his wife Maria. He thought of his home in Bremen. He thought of all the young men still fighting in U-boats across the Atlantic, still believing they could win. He hoped they would realize the truth soon, before more of them died for nothing. The war was over. Germany just had not admitted it yet, but they would. Soon, the ocean was full of proof.